All right, everybody, welcome back to Philosophy for the People, joined by the great professor, Dr. Jim Madden, here for another commentary or reaction episode. Today, my friends, we're going to go back to our Marxist, I don't want to say roots, because that isn't really where we're from, and I'm not a Marxist, and I don't think Dr. Jim is either, but that doesn't mean we can't study, and can't dabble, can't study, can't learn from various thinkers. And for those of you who have been with us a while, you'll remember that we did an entire 10-part series on Marcuse's One-Dimensional Man. It was awesome. I thought it was awesome. And real quick, Jim has recently brought my attention to a very interesting podcast dialogue. It's on a podcast called Breaking Points, and it features guest Christopher Rufo. And we thought this would be a really cool episode to just revisit some of the themes that were brought up in our study of One-Dimensional Man, talk about some contemporary issues, have a little bit of fun, and just see where it goes. So, Professor, always a joy.
Yeah, definitely. You know, and I think one of the things that we're asking in this is what is a Marxist, right?
Yes.
And I think what we're going to see here is many of the people self-identifying as Marxists today, many of the people that are identified by their opponents as Marxists today, are not at all Marxists, actually, right?
Indeed.
Yeah, right. And I think even since we did the Marcuse episode, my own understanding or series, right? My own understanding of Marxism has been enhanced, and I can see a very big gulf between what we see in Marcuse and what we see in old left Marxist thinking, which I think is an important thing for understanding the kind of sham politics that we have today, if I may, right? The duopoly that we're dealing with today. Yeah. So.
Yes. Dweedledee and Dweedledum, right?
Yeah. So a couple things about Breaking Points.
Yeah, give us the background for people who aren't familiar, because this was a new podcast to me. I had never seen this before until you sent it over.
I'm a huge Breaking Points fan. Like, my main source for news, political commentary is Breaking Points, right?
Cool.
Besides just, links to the dark web that Pat sends me, but that's different, right? Okay.
Obviously, right? Yeah.
Obviously, right?
Jim has his independent fact checker.
Right? Exactly. That's right. Right. Truth check. I'm not a fact checker. Right. Right. Anyway, so Breaking Points is hosted by a woman named Crystal Ball, who's sort of she's a Bernie gal, right? And she actually ran for Congress at one point. Worked in mainstream media on the left, right? So I think she worked for MSNBC for a while, and The Hill, I think she worked for a while. And then the co-host is a guy named Sagar, and I don't want to insult him by mispronouncing his Hindu last name. But Sagar is sort of a barstool conservative, I think is the way you would put it. Kind of a secular libertarian kind of conservative.
Okay.
Like a real like anti-war, economic freedom guy, right? Okay, like a Ron Paul type, I think, right? And he worked for Fox for a while, et cetera, but they both got fed up with just the terrible, terrible thing that the cable news, mainstream media is doing in ruining our nation, right? Okay,
right, yeah.
And so they formed this media company, Breaking Points, okay, and they do a daily show. Once again, I think it's absolutely wonderful because they're completely civil. They have very smart people on, right?
Mm-hmm.
People out of the mainstream. And then 2 days a week, I think it is, they're gone, and their fill-ins, they call it Counterpoints, which is with Ryan Grimm, who's, think of like a Bernie left kind of guy, an old left kind of guy, and Emily Dushinsky, who used to work, I believe, for the Federalist, right? So kind of a more, mainstream conservative type. And as I mentioned, from Waukesha. Right. So, okay. And I mentioned too, is one of the things that got me hooked on. I love it when Ryan and Emily are on, because Emily, it sounds like my cousin Ann, who grew up in New Berlin.
Right. Okay. Yeah. For people who are totally ignorant of what we're talking about, I myself hail from the great village of Waukesha. That's where I am. So that, and Jim himself originally hailed.
Yeah, my father grew up in Waukesha. Right. Yeah.
Right. So yes, we have some great sympathies for that. Mm-hmm.
That's right. So I would recommend to our listeners is if you're looking for a news political commentary source that's going to go out of the mainstream on everything, right?
And have different perspectives on matters.
Perspectives. Breaking Points. Okay. And
yeah,
by the
awesome.
way, they don't know us. We would be like insects to them. We don't have anything out of it. I'm just, right. Okay, now the particular episode, it's Christopher Rufo is the guest of Ryan and Emily on Counterpoints. And he's just written a book on the New Left and Marcuse and, basically giving an explanation of the source of a lot of the sort of wokeism that's in the university and political life. Okay. I was moved by this because I think it brings up a lot of the spaces that my own political thinking operates in, right?
Yeah.
And I thought it was fun for us to talk about it. I think you too, right? So,
right.
Let me just look at some key clips. And I want to know, I've not read Rufo's book, okay? So, but I'm planning to, okay. So in fairness to him, I've not read his book or anything like that. Not that he cares, right?
Neither have I. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, and once again, I'm not here to necessarily criticize anyone, but I just want to like kind of draw our listeners, draw our viewers into maybe a different kind of political thinking that would be healthy for all of us to do.
Oh, yes. That sounds very productive indeed. Just a quick remark. This was the first time I've seen an episode of Breaking Points, but as I mentioned before, by the way, this is take 2 of this episode because yesterday we tried, we had some internet failures. But what I said yesterday was I was really impressed. One, because it's clear that people from quite different perspectives are dialoguing, and it seemed to be a quite productive dialogue. It's a little bit funny because at the beginning of the episode, and we'll link it so people can check it out. The host, I think he said his name is Ryan, right? He kind of comes out swinging with Rufo. He's like, I think your book is kind of a museum of contradictions, but we'll get there. But then as they move, and Rufo was gracious about handling that. But the host was gracious too, and as they actually dialogued, it seemed like they came to agree more substantially than disagree on a lot of matters. So I just want to say it was like it was like the Rogan thing that we commented on recently. It's just it's always cool and heartening to just see conversations like these happening, and I want to encourage people give support to that because of course I think that's sort of just more what we need in today's society. So
Well, and actually I think what you're going to find, 100% what you said there, what you're going to find with these two guys is they have a very, very similar critique of the sort of woke left. Right? Like they see the contradictions of that very clearly. They both do. Now they have different conclusions they're going to draw from that premise, but they seem to share that same kind of critique of the woke left. Yeah.
All right, I don't want to let's just get right into it. I have a number of things I want to say, but I'll try and make the points at the opportune time. So Jim, is there any context we need for this initial clip before we make a commentary?
No, I want to hear some things that Emily says here because I think this really nails the important thing about this episode. So
okay, cool. All right. Well, when the professor raises his hand, I will stop the clip and then we'll comment. And here we go. All right. Listen up.
Governing a nation. And this is where you write about Patrisse Cullors, for instance, the person behind the Black Lives Matter global movement, who described herself as a Marxist, a trained Marxist. And it raises this fascinating question of, does the Nicole Hannah-Jones or does the Patrisse Cullors, who spent all this money on a mansion that was donated to BLM, do they actually want to seize the means of production? And if not, how did you get from Marx to today's Marxists describing themselves as trained Marxists, but promoting something that looks more like Marcuse than it does Marx?
Yeah, well, I mean, they certainly can be traced back to
we're going to pause
Marcuse,
it right there. And that is a lady from Waukesha, if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, she is from Waukesha, Wisconsin. There's no doubt. Okay, so, and Rufo goes on to more or less affirm what Emily brings up there. And this is a very important point for me is she's pointing out these people that identify themselves as trained Marxists and all this, and these cultural Marxists, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at what they're actually doing, they are not Marxists. Okay. Like one, there's just the duplicity of it when you see people cashing in on this, right. And all that. Okay.
Right. Yeah,
but a more important thing, and we're going to see this in a clip coming up here, is the Marxist critique is that what we are about, the Marxists, is changing the economic substructure of things to improve the standing of labor vis-a-vis the employing class, right? Okay. Whereas the woke thing now is operating at the level of symbols, right? At the level of ideas. Okay. Like old school Marxist would point out and say, you are idealists. You're not historical materialists, right? You see what I mean? Like they're actually doing the opposite of what the Marxists would do.
Yes. Right.
And if you look at it, what's happened is like, you don't hear from that woke so-called left, right? Concerns about labor. You don't hear them terribly concerned about like issues of class, right? It's about race, it's about gender, right? It's about identity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And the main argument of Marxism from the 19th century through the 60s in America, right, it was about labor, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You don't hear the woke left terribly concerned about what's happened to the living wage in America in the last 30 or 40 years. It's gone through the floor, right? You don't hear them concerned too much about the fact that you used to be able to have a family on one income and you're lucky to be able to do it on two incomes now. You don't hear that. It's about identity. It's about identity. It's about identity. It's about identity. Okay. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. And this for me is, and you've heard me rant about this before, is if indeed woke is about Marxism, then why the hell are corporations so into it?
Yeah. Right.
Like the last people that are going to be the vehicles of the Marxist revolution are like Nike, right? Okay. Right. You know what I mean? Why are they into it? Because if you look at it, the primary concerns of the American left until the 1960s were the power struggle between the labor class and the employer class, right? And if now we get ourselves believing that the source of our trouble is these people, it's race and it's gender issues in either direction, right? It's all these like social issues. Then they're not seeing ourselves as a working class anymore, and thereby prosecuting our issues as a working class, right?
Yeah.
So I think you can see this whole thing on the woke left, intentional or not, is just playing in the hands of the very capitalism they're supposedly opposing.
That's right. The machine has eaten them and co-opted them. That's right, which is exactly what Marcuse predicted, right?
He predicted, yeah. Now, and the thing is, like, it's a monster he created because he was one of the guys that shifted it all to identity.
It ate him too, man. Right? Yeah.
It ate him too, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you have people like Ryan Grimm, the show, who are old left. I don't know if he's a Marxist or not, but old left, socialist thinking people who are saying, wait, this has nothing to do with the actual issues that define us as the left, right?
Yeah.
Where is the interest of labor in this, right?
Yeah, right.
You see that. Yeah. So sorry.
Yeah. No, dude, I mean, that is a stellar and hugely important point, much more important than the one I was going to make, which is more just that concrete example of the quote that was up on the screen from Rufo's book about the inside out game that the corporations play, right? Yeah. Inside, behind the scenes, they're often pandering to and donating to various Republicans to get the financial breaks that they want, right? Outside, they're pandering to whatever they think is going to be culturally profitable to them, right? And that happens to be a lot of the sort of the wokeism of today, right? Not because they really, I mean, look, I'm sure there are some true believers, right? Because you get these different departments of people who really are into it. But it's at the end of the day, it really just still is that inside out game of what can they do to advance their own material interests.
Yeah, exactly. And look, if we are at each other's throat over like transgenderism or CRT or all these other issues, right? And I'm not minimizing the threat of those issues, okay? But if we're at each other's throat on this stuff, we're not like, so if you have like the Proud Boys,
right,
and the Antifa guys are clashing over this. Well, they're not saying, oh, wait, why is it that we are
right? Nike can still exploit its slave labor. No problem.
Like, why are we going to make less money than our parents did? They're not asking that, right? Do you know what I mean? They're not asking that now. So cui bono, who benefits from that? Nike benefits from that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so I think like we have to see, and then you do have a cynical, Rufo, Grimm and Dushinsky will all say in this, a cynical cash-in is going on in this sort of left class, like, okay, which is once again not really a Marxist thing to be doing, right? But on top of it, they're playing in the hands of the very capitalist machine that they're supposedly opposing.
Yes, right. They are just still within that structure, that economic structure. Most of them are at the top of it, right? Ironically enough. The other thing I don't know if this is the order of the clip, so we're going to get to the clip where they talk about the difference between the original thinkers and Rufo's sort of begrudging, not acceptance of them, but coming to at least appreciate and like them versus the sort of more modern popular level promoters of CRT and their inherent cynicism and all that. Is that
go bring it up? I think
I forget where it is, but it was a point I wanted to talk about. So here, let me just hit the play button and we'll just pause it. Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Kind of the person who really established all of the language, all of the ideas, all of the styles and aesthetics that were used by BLM is Angela Davis. I mean, she developed all of this many decades before, and then also became a personal mentor to the leaders of BLM. And so one of the interesting things, though, that I felt in the process of researching and writing this book was, even though I paint these biographical portraits of what I think of as the four prophets of the new left and the modern left, Marcuse, Angela Davis, Paulo Freire, Derek Bell, the godfather of CRT, even though I really disagree with the work that they do, I think they've yielded devastating consequences in the United States and also abroad. But I gained a grudging kind of respect for these people. They were idealists who I'm afraid through their mistakes became cynics in some way. But you actually have to respect their own personal transformation from that idealistic starting point to their cynicism. When you compare it to something like BLM, which I think is wholly cynical from the beginning, it doesn't have any of that spirit of inquiry, discovery, breaking new ground, idealism, utopianism even. And so there's an attractive quality to these thinkers. And what I wanted to do in the book, and I hope you both agree, is I wanted to write a book that certainly has my point of view, obviously.
I'm gonna pause it there because that's the point I wanted to comment on. And I just want to say, in general, I think this is important to recognize that when it comes to the great ideas or the great thinkers in human history, if you actually read them and spend time with them, it's hard not to admire and like them, no matter how much you profoundly disagree with them, right? Whether it's Nietzsche, whether it's Kant, whether it's Descartes, whoever it is, when you read a great thinker, whether it's Marcuse, you might profoundly disagree with them, but you admire their intellectual powers, their zeal. A lot of them have incredible zeal, right? It's like you're dealing with somebody who is really significant here. It's hard not to. Whereas if you read some popular level piece of trash by like Kendi or whatever, right? It really, there's nothing to admire there. It really is garbage. It really is cynical, exactly what he's saying. And I would just encourage people that, okay, maybe you dismiss this popular level stuff as trash. That should not discourage you from going back and actually reading some of the fathers of Marxist thought. Again, I have many disagreements. I also have many agreements as well. But when you actually read Marcuse or Marx, you stand to benefit in many ways by studying their work, right? And of course, if you're into philosophy for the people, I would say you have an obligation to read to study the great ideas and the great thinkers. Like that's just part of a general philosophical education to begin with, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and and I think an important thing to note too is, okay, so when you look at the radical left in the 60s, right? Okay. Much we could say about many of the views that were rampant in that, okay? But man, they did a lot to stop a pretty terrible war, right?
Yep.
Okay. They did a lot to advance the civil rights movement, right? Okay. I mean, the good luck complaining about that. All right.
Yeah.
I think this is part of what Rufo is getting at there. If you look at the thinkers in that era and the kids in the streets and stuff, there was a kind of utopian dedication to a better world.
Yes. Right.
Okay? And they were getting the snot beat out of them, and they were, you know what I mean? Like taking grave risks to defy the draft and things like that. And what do you think about that? But at least there was a kind of authentic dedication to something there, right?
Yes.
It wasn't a cash in, right? Now what we have now is people like trying to huff on the fumes of that, cashing in, and also playing into the very hands of what the people they're citing were opposing.
Yes, right.
You know what I mean?
Of course.
Like I doubt Herbert Marcuse was. I mean, like you've read One Dimensional Man. Not a fan of the American corporation. Okay.
Probably not taking, I don't know if this is fact, but I'm guessing he probably wasn't taking a $50,000 check to give a keynote to these people,
no,
right?
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? Exactly. I don't see Marcuse doing that. Now, one thing, there's a great article, and I'm going to forget his name. I had sent it to you that I read recently. Gosh, what was his name again? Anyway, okay, it'll come to me. But making the case that if you look at, so the after World War II, you have this split in left thinking, right, in the West between the Frankfurt School people and then the more traditional Marxists. Okay.
Yeah.
And the more traditional Marxists are like, this is about the working class, this is about the material conditions of labor, and that's where we're going to push. That's going to push. They're making great progress with that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the Frankfurt School goes in this direction. No, it's about sexual identity, racial identity, right? All these other identity issues. Okay. And less concerned as it rolls through the 60s, 70s, 80s with having anything to do with the material conditions of the working class, right? Mm-hmm. In this article, a good case is made that the money behind the think tanks that supported the Frankfurt School, both in Germany and the United States, was being funneled from the CIA through various foundations like the Rockefellers. Okay. All right. So what do you have? You have big capital, big military industrial complex, all this stuff interested in supporting this new version of the left. Well, what is it? Why? Right. Because it took the labor issue off, right? It alienated the labor.
Because it supports them, right?
Mm-hmm. Supports them, right? You know what I mean? And so then you do, like, and I'm not saying like Marcuse knew this. I'm not saying like Horkheimer knew this, right? But they got duped, I think, right?
Yeah.
And to become the very vehicles of what they were supposedly opposing.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Totally.
Uh-huh.
Totally.
Congratulations. Played yourselves.
You played yourself. Yeah. So what would you think about, let's go to 920.
All right. Here we go. No problem. Let me skip ahead here. 920. Almost there. All right. Let me pull the video back up. Oh, there he is. Here we go.
Want to do that. They have no interest in doing that, no capacity to do that.
They're
very happy occupying the superstructure, and they have. We are given up the old Marxist politics of reshaping the economic base using the Marxist terminology. The critical race theorists don't want to take over a Ford factory and start building F-150s. I mean, it's like they don't want to do that. They have no interest in doing that, no capacity to do that. They're very happy occupying the superstructure, and they have substituted that old demand to change the economic conditions with a new demand, simply to play symbolically with language, words, titles, prestige, and position within the superstructure. And so it serves as almost
that's a great point.
Substitute or a simulacrum of Marxism that ends always in cynicism, right? Because you can't claim to be a revolutionary, sitting in your comfortable reading chair at a public university at UC Berkeley or UCLA or Harvard or University of Wisconsin, wherever you might be, and pretend that when you're doing Zoom calls with the Treasury Department, teaching employees about their white privilege, that you're doing something revolutionary. I think it's wrong. I think it's harmful. I think it's wasteful. I think it could be disastrous for long term. But you're right. It's been a kind of this uneasy truce or this uneasy management of power between the corporation and between these activists that probably really doesn't satisfy anyone. I don't think that old school Marxists are satisfied with DEI, and certainly conservatives aren't either.
Let's pause there.
Cool. Yeah, that was an awesome summary of, I think, the points we're trying to articulate here.
I think he really pulls together a lot of ideas for us there, right? And I like.
Let me just say real quick. I've only known of Rufo kind of superficially. Obviously, he's made a name for himself being critical of CRT. But I'm actually pretty impressed, at least at this initial conversation, that the depth of his. He doesn't seem to be just like a shock jock type of guy on this matter. You know what I mean? Right.
Yeah. And so
now maybe he's wrong about a bunch of stuff. I don't know, but so far, I'm interested to hear more from him from this conversation. Right.
I like how he said there. Neither. So what's going on? So okay. This is, I actually heard this on Breaking Points. So it was when there was talk of the repayment of student loans. Okay. I didn't realize that. Okay. So the vast majority of student loans, according to Crystal Ball on Breaking Points, the vast majority of student loans that go out to people who do not finish like tech school level degrees. Okay. Like that's where the most like crushing debt is going on. Right. And like one of the things that you look at, like one of the worst industries for this is the barber industry. Okay. So like in Texas, to become a barber, you have to like have 2 years of school, right? And you have to have like all these clinical hours. I remember like I forget what the number was, but it was more clinical hours than my wife needed to become a marriage therapist.
All right. Just so you don't like nick the back of my ear, right? When you're
yeah, exactly. And the thing is, you're paying tuition all the while you're doing this, and like, but they're like charging people that, you know, the schools are charging people for the haircuts and stuff like this. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you have a lot of people who they go into, you know, poorer neighborhoods. You're back.
Yep. Sorry, a little choppiness, but you're back.
You got
now.
me?
Yeah.
You back? All right, back. So they go into these poorer neighborhoods, people have never been to college, things like that, and they troll up all these people who go to barber's college, right? And they generally wash out because they can't get to the clinical hours, and they hit the street with all this debt, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, so here's my point. It doesn't help someone in that situation, right, who's trying to better themselves to say, but hey, look, we've got someone from your identity group who's in high office. We've got someone from your identity group who's on TV. We've got someone in your, like, the way we're trying to address the concerns of people who are getting the bad end of the stick, like whether it's crushing, using an example of student loan debt, right, which is like preying up in the inner cities, right?
Yep.
When we were trying to deal with that is like, oh no, you should feel better because now you've got someone who looks like you or feels like you in certain offices. Not, we're going to actually find a way for you to make a meaningful living.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Which, and that's what the old school Marxists were about, right? You see what I mean, right? And instead, like, hey man, feel better because someone looks like you or someone
in the latest Ninja Turtles movie or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Like, so we're going to demand representation of the popular culture, but meanwhile, you know, go ahead and like borrow money to an endless degree that you don't really understand what's going on and happening to you, but be happy that, you know, you can see yourself on TV. You see, like, that's what they're saying here, right? Mm-hmm. And they're right about this. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. I love how Rufo points out this should leave old school Marxists dissatisfied and this should leave conservatives dissatisfied.
Yes,
right. Like, and I think you can see he's pointing like there could be some kind of real coalition here between old working class, quote unquote, liberals, right, and conservatives, right, who don't want people treated like that either. Do you see what I mean?
Of course, right. Yeah.
But in as much as we're fighting over like how many, you know, people of whatever stripe are in the Ninja Turtles movies, we're not doing that, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, 100%. And that in fact was a common theme when we were studying Marcuse together. I think we made pretty clear, like, hey, there's a lot that we, as I hesitate to use the word conservative for people who aren't familiar with the podcast, because like I'm anything but a mainstream Republican, right? You know, if there's any sort of, I guess, party in America that I think like, okay, maybe I belong in that, it'd be like something like the Solidarity Party, which has all like 13 people in it, right? Right. But like a true classical conservative, excuse me, right? I think if you're reading something like Marcuse, you're hearing a lot of this, there's a lot you should disagree with, at least when it comes to identifying what are actual problems, right? Maybe we might part ways when we start talking about what we think the way out is, or what, you know, how we should ultimately organize society. But when it comes to saying like, look, this is clearly an issue, right? This is a problem. I think that there's a lot of common ground that could be found here. And I think Rufo and yourself have done a good job of pointing it out, that we can be friends on these issues, right? We can form these, and we should form these coalitions, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We're like arguing over like what he calls these sort of like symbolic identity things, and we're not arguing over like predatory lending, right?
Yeah,
which is the real problem for everybody, right?
Yes, right. And like the proposed solutions you know, and they're always so superficial and really just absolute pandering nonsense, right? Only further incentivize the perverse structures that are already there. right?
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean? And you see like something like that weird thing where like the barber school lobby in Texas is able to get these like laws passed requiring these clinical hours, right? And so now you've got all these people like getting sucked into predatory lending for this, and it's spinning, and no one really cares about that, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But man, we can have a fight over the Second Amendment in Texas, though, right?
Yeah. And then, well, yeah, and then of course there's all the other policies that go and incentivize that predatory lending to make sure that these people are never punished for doing that, and only ever exacerbates the issue rather than corrects it. And like, is that incompetence? Is it malice? I go back and forth, right?
Yeah. And let's say those loans get repaid. Well, it's not like the predatory lenders are going to get on the hook for it. It's going to be the rest of us, right? You know what I mean? So you can see why, like, both on the left and the right, we should hate that idea. And rather than like saying, why don't we treat people decently? We're going to like, you know, we're going to treat them badly and then help out the people who are doing it to them.
Yeah,
right?
we're gonna treat the common man very poorly, right? We're gonna mulk them out of their hard money, and then further incentivize and reward the perps. That's exactly the types of policies that are being promoted right now, right?
All right, so can we go to? Do you mind if we go to 1317?
1317. I like the sound of that number. Here we go. You know what? I'll give you 1317 right on the dot, my friend. Uh-oh, ad. Let me kill the volume while this ad plays. Everyone's got to make their dollar on YouTube these days, man.
That's right.
Including us. All right, here we go.
They want the 3-bedroom house, the Ford car, the cabin in the woods for the summer. They're happy with this life that they have. And so it's the frustrated, alienated intellectuals, not the frustrated, alienated working class, that becomes the new subject of the revolution.
And let's do a little bit on Marcuse, because I think that one of the problems I had with the book, I think the chapters on Marcuse they're a fun read. It's kind of a run.
I like it that I think all three of them pronounce Marcuse in different ways.
I know, I know, and it's my understanding it's Marcuse. I think Rufo pronounced it correctly, right? But so here, that was actually, I didn't quite get the timestamp right, but it more or less got to the point I wanted to. Is okay. So this is where I start to disagree with Rufo a little bit. Okay, so Rufo, basically wants to argue that like the left needed to find something new to do because like the things got good for the working class such that they were less interested in radical politics anymore. Okay. And that's where he's saying like, look, they were happy to get the new truck. They were happy to get the vacations and all this stuff, et cetera, right? And okay, yes, but this is like, it's not like that just happened organically. It's not like we aren't constantly bombarded by an image of what the good life is, right? By these corporations, such that if we play the game, we'll get satisfaction, right? I think this is a very important Marxist concept, is this notion of the creation of false desires, right? You know what I mean? And so it becomes this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy is like, yeah, look, man, we can get people really, really happy if we tell them happiness is the stuff that we're selling. And if you work for us, you become indebted to us, you can have this stuff.
Right. Netflix, whiter teeth, fat pills, you name it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. This is what one of the things that like triggered me on James Lindsay when they started our first Marcuse thing, right? Is like, he was saying the absurdity of all like left arguments, the absurdity of all like Marxist economics, because look, man, if you talk to the average guy, he just wants to be able to buy the consumer goods. And as long as the job gets him the consumer goods, that's fine. But my point would be, yeah, well, it's not as if that guy is just left alone to make a rational consumer decision. He is constantly, since the time, like, we know that corporations want kids to have brand identity, like before they can talk. Right.
Yeah.
So don't act like it's like, oh, the market is solving this and happy, right? Like, no, it's like,
when did the Ford F-150 become like the Aristotelian point of flourishing for the human?
Yeah, being, exactly.
Right. Versus changing your gender identity, right? Like he seemed like, what is his grounding for like the determinate end of human nature? Versus, I'd love to hear it. I don't think he actually has one, right? Yeah. He just sort of is sort of like
This is
like
Lindsay,
he's good on some issues, but I think he's just kind of your typical. He's quite crude on others, right?
Yeah, and so I think people on the left were right to say, well, look, and this is in Marcuse, right? Is like what all that's happened here is like we've done this like propaganda psyop on the working class to get them to think the good life is these consumer goods, right? We can deliver that to them, and then we've just sort of enslaved them in a system now.
Yeah, and now they'll just do the same thing of saying, well, the good life is a sex change operation.
Yeah, or yeah. And
you know what? The Ford F-150, we didn't do it for you, right? But when you're a woman inside that truck, after however much that operation costs,
yeah, I read some stuff recently, and maybe it's garbage, but like studying like the degree to which their advertising can like actually affect your dreams and stuff like this. I mean,
sure.
So, you see what I'm saying? It's not like when we say, oh no, like the market is solving this and like people are happy with what the market's delivering, that assumes we just leave people alone to make their own rational decisions.
That's a fantasy, right?
We are constantly subconsciously being manipulated by this. And to say, well, no, there's no need for a left anymore because the working class is satisfied with consumer goods. Well, it's only because the working class is being constantly, meaning all of us, constantly bombarded and manipulated and hypnotized by advertisement. Right?
That's right. Yeah, dude. I mean, and that's so obviously true. Again, I feel like I have to qualify this before somebody comes out and is like, Pat's a raging Marxist. This is not. Nobody's ever accused me of that, right?
Yeah.
Real quick, my political history is I was quite liberal, then I was extremely libertarian, never bought into the mainstream Republican. Now I think that I'm just sort of a very traditional virtue ethic Catholic guy, right? Which means that I can see a lot of points of agreement in the Marxist critique that I think anybody coming from that perspective should be able to say, yes, this is right. However, I do have a framework, and I think it's a pretty good one, that gives you a value scale as well of like what human flourishing actually is about. That is fundamentally at odds with the sort of propaganda that Jim's talking about that is thrown at the human person that tells us what our point of arrival is or point of flourishing. That definitely is it. And the idea that the market's just going to figure it out is absolutely ludicrous, right? I mean, the market will serve you all sorts of depravity after it convinced you that the depravity was good for you. It gets you to pay for it, right? That is not the market figuring anything out. Now, what the solution is to that problem, I'm not entirely sure. But that is a problem is so obviously a problem. It's ridiculous that it can't be admitted by some people, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Jim.
This is why Alistair McIntyre in his last complete book, maybe it's his last book entirely, but his most recent complete book, Ethics in Conflict and Modernity, says there are two people we need to read: Aquinas, because he thinks he has the best account of what flourishing is, and Marx's Capital, because it provides us the best account of the particular deceptions of a modern market economy. Right?
Man, McIntyre.
And this is exactly what he's talking about. So good. And this is exactly what he's talking about here. Is like, no, you are even leaving aside like the really acerbic stuff like transgenderism and all that and culture of death stuff, just leaving that aside. Even we are constantly bombarded with a false account of what the good life is. Right.
Yes.
Right. And that's why we are obese. That's why we are drug addicted. That's why like both legal and illegal
overly
drugs,
medicated,
all that. Right.
Addicted.
And that's why we.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I agree with someone like Rufo, who's going to say a lot of our problems are the result of our overconsumption of consumer goods. Sure. But it's not as if we are the only active parties in bringing that about. Like like if suddenly the virtues of prudence and moderation broke out, our economy would crash. Right.
Oh,
Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, dude. Right.
Right. And so I think to say like, and that's actually going to get us to the next clip here, right? But I think to act as if our satisfactions with consumer goods is something like an argument in favor of like typically like conservative economics. I don't think it's at all, because that once again it assumes we make rational decisions about this, and our system conspires against us making rational decisions about this.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Great point.
So
Awesome.
we do one more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're
go to
timestamp.
32 minutes on the head.
32 minutes. You got it. Hold on. Let's see if it's going to bump another ad up. It might do that. I think we lucked out. Let's see here. All right.
There certainly is something that, and in my view, I wouldn't analyze it from his point of view, but while I would agree with certain elements of what he's saying, I would say that it's really the loss of those old Benjamin Franklin virtues of prudence, temperance, frugality, all of these things, self-restraint. And so I would like to see not a society where the government spends more money on welfare programs that actually achieve the opposite of their intentions, but actually restoring people in a kind of maybe even like a hokey Dave Ramsey kind of way. Those old American virtues that, Ben Franklin did his famous checklist every day. Am I being temperate and frugal? And I think that those things are so foreign to how we think today. That I think that, again, it kind of is a cultural problem more than a material problem. If we have material solutions to technical challenges, to raising standards of living, I mean, we have an affluent society, absolutely, and that's good. But we need to have the virtues that can restrain some of the problems and some of the temptations.
The old Ben Franklin virtues, Professor. Did you read Ben Franklin's Nicomachean and Ethics?
That's right. Yeah. Right. Well, so yeah, this is where once again I come on the side from Rufo on this. Is like, okay, one. Would we want a sudden outbreak of prudence in the American economy right now? I don't think we actually would, if we're honest, right? Because like, what happens to McDonald's if suddenly prudence breaks out, right? What happens to, what happens to,
It is an interesting and difficult thought experiment. It's like, if America suddenly became actually virtuous, like just along the line of the cardinal virtues, like what would happen, right?
What would happen, right? I mean, like, I think we have to admit we have an economy that is predicated on a consumption, right?
On vice.
Okay? On vice, yeah. So if we are going to maximize the economic output, because like decisions were made that we are now a consumer society, not a productive society. Our stuff is made overseas. We get it over here for the cost of printing the money, right? Yeah. And then our end of it is mostly the selling the consumption.
Well, think about it, man. I mean, like, so much of our economy is vice, right? Think of the vice of sloth. People think sloth has to do with laziness. That's not exactly right. It's just not prioritizing certain goods, right? If you're religious, if you're Catholic, are like all of the modern, like, go get them, work ethic mentality is really slothful, right? Yeah. It's putting the material goods over and above the supernatural goods, right? So like that itself is structurally vicious, and then there's just that's sort of the production side of it. It's grounded in, I think, a widespread sloth, right? And then there is the consumption side of it, and then like just a museum of viciousness on that end, right? Yeah,
and you get my point. Like the much of our economy presupposes this. Right?
That's what I'm saying. You're right.
You know what I mean? It's like I tell you what, man, like the Miller Corporation doesn't want a sudden outbreak of moderation with respect to drink, man. They don't want it,
dude, right? Not at all, right?
Not at all, right? Do you know what I mean? Like think of how many industries we have, and the ones that most bump, like does the Ford Corporation want you making good decisions financially, or they want you financing cars at like 7%, right? They don't, you know what I mean? Like all these things. And so I think for someone like Rufo to say, now I agree with him, like, look, we need to look at like how much good dumping federal dollars into various programs are and stuff like that. 100%. Okay. But to say, oh, the way we're going to beat this, we're going to get back to the old fashioned, old timey Ben Franklin virtues, right? Well, Ben Franklin's virtues were not competing against a machine of titillating consumption, constantly presenting people with temptation, right? And one that, frankly, we all have a material interest in it, in the overconsumption.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And so I think it's harder than that, right? I think it's harder than
harder than that. I don't have even close to anything of any sort of answer to it. In fact, right?
Yeah, right. You know what I mean? But I think though to say, oh, the problem is the people that are borrowing the bad money, or they're eating too much, whatever. They just need to sort of, Ben Franklin prudence their way out of it. Well, okay, sure, but one, how badly do we really want that to happen given our economy? And two, how likely is it given how much we are bombarded with contrary messages, right?
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that question answers itself, right?
Yeah. And what's interesting here is like the typical left now today, like the woke left, they don't care about this. You know what I mean? Like they're not going to tell McDonald's, you shouldn't be advertising so much to the children, right? You know what I mean?
Right. They're just going to be like, put, this and that on your Happy Meal box, right? Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Just make sure, the Happy Meal box is gender ambiguous, right?
That's
and
right.
the right's not going to do it because, that it's good for the profits, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do think there's this question, like, could there be another kind of coalition of the old left and the old right? You know what I mean?
Dude, it starts here. It starts today. Yeah. Philosophy for the people.
Yeah.
As the revolution will not be televised, as we know.
Will not be televised, right?
But it will be live streamed.
It will be live streamed, right? Cool, man. So that's all the rants I have on that. But
dude, that was awesome, man. No, that was great, man. And we don't do a whole lot on political philosophy, but I love when we veer into it, and especially when we get to intersect with some contemporary cultural and social issues. Obviously, these things are very important to think about, and I appreciate you coming on here to help giving us some clarity about that, Professor, and also introducing us to a cool new podcast. Like I said, I was unaware of Breaking Points. It seems like it's a pretty valuable resource. I trust your recommendation, and I hope other people will check it out as well. I'll be sure to link this episode in the show notes so people can see that specifically, and then they can dive into whatever else that they want after that.
We'll have to tweet it to Emily Dushinsky and Ryan Grimm, right? Because like maybe Emily can give a shout out to a couple of Waukesha homeboys.
Dude, yeah, for sure, man. Hey, help us out, gentle listeners. Put the to do the tweeting, for our on our behalf as well. It's sometimes how you get the attention of these people. You just send a mob of send all your cronies out there to do it for you, right? Mm-hmm.
And remember, follow McIntyre's advice: read your Aquinas and read your Capital.
Right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. That reminds me, because I know you sent me that piece from McIntyre. I'm going to carve out some time today to read that one. Dude's impressive, man. He's got to be like 90 something. He's still at it, right? Mm-hmm.
Dude published his first article in the 50s.
That's amazing.
Amazing.
Right?
He's a machine. Right.
Good stuff, man. What's up next? Anything you want to announce before we say farewell?
Not really. Just plugging away. I'm proofreading the book. Proofreading the new book.
Good. Love to hear it.
Got the proofs. Get that out soon. Right. Other than that, going to be heading to Waukesha soon.
Nice. Oh yeah. So, gentle listeners, stay tuned for perhaps a special live stream event.
Right.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Give us your thoughts if you listened to the episode. If we missed any segments that you thought were interesting, comment below. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you next time. Adios.